People who live rurally, what's the scariest experience you've had that you can't explain? Story 1. As a kid and teen, I lived in a semi-rural area. It was a small village next to a forest with a small river flowing through it and lots of farmland, fields with crops and animals. I was an outdoorsy kid and often went into the forest with my friends to walk, play, and explore, but I never went alone. The path started at our old school and wound up through the forest. It ran through a fairly large ravine surrounding the river. When you reached the top, there was another small part of the village and then a path leading along the fields. It went into the section of the forest above the ravine's ditch, which led to the main part of the village. For context, in autumn and winter, you could stand at the edge and look down onto the path below. As I got older, I would go on regular walks with my dog along this path. I loved it and never felt uneasy in that forest. I knew it so well that it felt almost like an extension of my backyard. In my mid-teens, my dog passed away, and I avoided the walk for a couple of weeks. It was too painful, a constant reminder of him and how much I missed him. One afternoon in early autumn, I randomly decided to go on the walk again. This was one of the first times I had walked through the forest completely alone. At first, I didn't think much of it, but the deeper I went, the stranger it felt. I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder without knowing why. The most unsettling thing was the silence. Apart from the bubbling of the river, the forest was completely still. Anyone who's spent time in the woods knows that kind of silence is a major red flag. By that point, I was too far in for turning back to matter, so I pressed on. I remember feeling like I was prey. It was a strange, almost primal sensation, like my body was warning me to stay alert. In the area I lived, there were no dangerous animals, no bears, no wolves, so I had no idea where this instinct was coming from. I started jogging through the woods, scanning my surroundings, my senses on edge. When I finally reached the top, relief washed over me, and I slowed to a walk as I followed the fields and the thin tree line above the ravine. I glanced down at the path I had just come from, and then looked back up. My heart skipped a beat. There, just off the path in the tree line, stood a tall, slender woman. She seemed to be dancing, but not in any graceful way. She was spinning, twisting her arms, neck, and back into unnatural positions, and yet everything about her looked normal. Her clothes and shoes were appropriate for the weather, her hair and makeup perfectly done. I froze, rooted to the spot, staring at her. Then her head snapped in my direction, and she froze mid-movement, locking eyes with me. For a brief, terrifying second, I thought she was going to sprint straight toward me. Instead, she muttered, "Hello," and began speed-walking down the path I was meant to follow. It took me several seconds to compose myself, and for some inexplicable reason, I just kept walking. The path curved around a corner and into another small patch of woods before the village resumed. But when I turned the corner mere seconds after her, she had vanished. The path stretched on, eventually turning into a paved road for at least a couple of 100 meters, but she was nowhere in sight. Then I heard it, a twig snapping in the trees beside me. That was all it took. I bolted, sprinting until I was safely back in the village. Although all I wanted was to get home, I wandered around the village for a while, terrified she might be following me. Since that day, I never ventured into that forest alone again. I always made sure my mom, dad, or one of my brothers was with me. Looking back, she was probably more startled that I had seen her than anything else, but I will never forget that gut-churning feeling of being watched, an instinct screaming that whatever it was very much not good news. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. Not my story, but a friend's that I've heard a few times. When she was 12, in the late 90s, her family moved into a 2-story farmhouse in northern Michigan. The attic ran the length of the house. Because of her dad's job, they moved every couple of years, living in rentals until his contract was completed. If I recall correctly, he worked with industrial machines and welding. The farmhouse was far from everything. The nearest neighbor was over 2 miles away, and the next person lived even farther. It took almost an hour to get into town, which made getting up for the bus a pain. But the house was cheap and had a large garden. Her mom loved the idea of growing all their own vegetables, and her dad did not mind the commute. She had a brother who was a year older, and they both got their own rooms. The attic was accessed through a door in her brother's closet. They were initially excited about the idea of setting up a hangout or play space, but their parents forbade it. The attic was filthy, filled with boxes, antique trunks, and old furniture. So if something fell, it could hurt them, and if they did get hurt, their parents might not hear them until it was too late. The kids were not supposed to go up there at all. Adding to the temptation, however, was a locked door at the back end of the attic. Above her room, they did not have the key. Their dad even shoved an old mattress and other items in the way to further deter them. According to her, her parents said the landlord had told them the items in the attic were left by previous tenants. He had never gotten around to sorting through it and did not care if they explored it themselves. She did not know and never thought to ask if the landlord had ever explained what the room in the attic was for. She said that was part of why her parents did not want them going up there. They had no idea what was in the boxes and other items and did not want the kids to find something dangerous or inappropriate. Now and then at night, she would hear quiet footsteps in the attic. Items would get pushed around. For her brother to reach the end of the attic above her room, he had to walk over their parents' room and then cross back to get to his own. She figured he was treading on thin ice and would get caught eventually, and it was not worth causing a fuss by tattling. Once or twice a week, she would wake to the sound of clear footsteps pacing quietly. Boxes would shift, and eventually she would hear a faint, rhythmic creaking. She would close her eyes and fall back asleep with determination, trying not to imagine what a 13-year-old boy could be doing in a forbidden attic to make that sound. After they had been there for about half a year, she woke up late one Saturday morning. Looking out the window, she saw her parents working in the garden. She ate some cereal and then returned to her room to play Pokemon for a while. For the first time, she heard footsteps in the attic during the day. Curious, she went to her brother's room. The closet and attic stair door were open. She went up just far enough to peek into the attic from the stairs. In moments, she saw many boxes, and the mattress had been moved. The door to the locked room was ajar. Her brother poked his head out, looked right at her, grinning, and called her by name. "You have to come see this," he said. He beckoned her, then slid back out of sight into the room. She told me she had never felt so wrong and afraid before or since, except for the first time she heard a mountain lion in the woods at night. She immediately bolted down the stairs and ran out to the yard to tell her parents what her brother was doing. But he was outside too, helping in the garden all morning. They asked why she looked so scared. All she could think to say was, "I heard someone in the attic." Her dad told them all to stay put. He grabbed his gun from the truck and went into the house, while their mom stayed by the phone in the kitchen, ready to call the police if anything happened. Before going in, the parents gave the kids instructions to get on their bikes and head to the neighbors as fast as they could if the parents did not come back out within 10 minutes. Several tense minutes passed as they straddled their bikes, watching their mom through the kitchen window from a distance. Dad rapidly cleared the house and attic. He came back out furious at the brother because the attic had obviously been rearranged and the locked door opened. The brother denied ever having been up there since they moved in, citing dust and spiders. He had become a severe arachnophobe as an adult. Well, someone opened the room, so who was it? What was in there? There was no light fixture and no window, just an antique wooden rocking chair, nearly falling apart, that did not match the style of any other furniture in the pre-furbished house. It faced the wall. The brother did not get in much trouble because there was a thick layer of dust. The only footprints found were Dad's, but there were clear marks where the boxes had been shoved aside to clear a path. Since there was no other rational explanation, he was grounded for the rest of the summer. A friend said she refused to go near the attic for the remaining 2 years they lived there. She slept on the downstairs couch whenever she could, just to be even further away. Some nights she would wake up, still hearing quiet footsteps and what she had come to recognize as the sound of rocking. She said that the only time she was already awake when it started after that day, she realized there was no crossing noise. In other words, there was no sound of someone walking across the attic to get into the room, just the quiet sounds of someone settling into a chair, shifting and rocking in the space almost directly over her bed. She has told me that as an adult, she still has 2 recurring nightmares about the attic. In one dream, whoever or whatever looked like her brother sticks his head out of the door, just as he had when he called to her. He smiles and beckons. The entire scene, the door and the doppelganger, moves closer and closer while she is frozen in place. When he starts to reach out to grab her, she wakes up. In this dream, she knows it is not really her brother. She experiences intense terror and panic and is usually unable to get back to sleep. In the other dream, when he sticks his face out, he is covered in dust, his face streaked with tears, and he is begging her for help. In this dream, she knows in her heart that it really is her brother, but something pulls him back into the room. The door closes. She wakes up racked with guilt and fear, still frozen in place. I have talked to her brother about the house. She says she has never told him what she saw that day or about the noises at night. All he remembers is being angry for getting in trouble for something he did not do. He had made friends with the kids down the road, and they had invited him to ride ATVs on their property. Being grounded meant he missed out. I asked him if he had ever had trouble sleeping in that house or if anything strange had happened, besides not knowing who had moved the attic items. He said no. He was pretty sure it had been his sister playing some kind of prank and then denying it after their parents reacted so seriously. He did say, however, that he had a lot of weird dreams while they lived there. He could never remember what the dreams were about when he woke up, just that they were strange. Story 3. There are quite a few experiences I could share, but I'll start with the least paranormal. I was sitting outside watching the goat when suddenly I heard coyotes going wild to the northeast. Over them came a constant warbly growl from the same direction, drowning out the coyotes entirely, until the night went completely silent. I've hunted hogs, invasive bobcats, and just about every huntable animal in North America, but I've never heard anything like that before or since. In my parents' house, you can hear people talking through the walls, but as soon as you leave the room you're in, the sound stops. Everyone who visits frequently has heard this at least once. I once showered with the bathroom door open while the family was away. Midway through, I heard the door open and my parents talking, laughing, and putting things away. I quickly finished, hopping out to greet them, but when I reached the kitchen, no one was there. No cars outside, nothing had been moved or was missing. The bloodhound remained undisturbed, but our smaller dogs were panicking. I called my parents, assuming they had come back for something, but they told me they were still 2 towns away. When I was young, maybe 4 or 5, my mom often slept in the living room with me and my 2 sisters as a family bonding ritual. One night, while watching King of the Hill, my mom and I heard the ferret gate at the bottom of the stairs slam shut. We glanced at each other and she jumped up to wake my dad. He found nothing amiss. The basement has only one exit, the stairs, which are carpeted. When we tested it in the morning, we realized it took a lot of force to recreate that sound. I didn't experience this personally, but my parents tell the story often. When my sister and I were very young, she was 4 and I was 2, my parents heard a loud banging on their bedroom wall. They described it as deliberate knocking. They bolted upright in bed, looked at each other, and my dad grabbed a baseball bat. Neither my sister, I, nor the dogs we had at the time stirred. My parents and the police, even with K9 units, found no trace of anyone. More recently, when I was around 14, I had my desktop PC set up on the kitchen table because I didn't have a desk in my room. Late at night, while playing video games, I started hearing knocking. At first I ignored it, thinking it was part of the game, but it kept happening again and again and again. I took off my headphones and realized the sound was coming from the door between the garage and the kitchen at the other end of the room. I approached the door with a kitchen knife in hand, but found nothing. The knocking stopped after that first night. I immediately went to wake my mom, but she just told me to go back to bed and rolled over. A little while later it happened again, clear as day, and we both heard it. This time she got up to investigate, but still there was nothing there. After that, it didn't happen again that night. My sister always claimed that late at night or early in the morning between midnight and 4 a.m. you could hear a woman screaming in the utility room of our parents' basement. It was connected to a bed and bath. I assumed she was just making it up for fun. On the 4th of July last year, she came home with her son, partied, and passed out in her old room downstairs. I agreed to listen for her baby until I went to bed, since he was sleeping with her so she could get some rest. I heard crying and assumed it was the baby, so I went downstairs and opened the door. What I heard, however, was clearly a woman bawling her eyes out, coming from the utility room or bathroom. My sister and her son were asleep in the main bed together, both completely out. I immediately shut the door and ran back upstairs. I sat in the kitchen and waited for it to stop. Then the baby started crying, and you could immediately tell the difference between the two if you had heard it. Story 4. Years ago, my husband was active duty in the Army, and we lived in northern New York, about an hour's drive north of the base. It was a small town with no friends or family nearby. One night, he went in for an overnight duty, the first since I had moved up there. The townhome we were renting had a normal screen door and an inner door with a deadbolt that opened into a mudroom. Inside the mudroom, there was a door to the right of the front door leading into the garage. It had a deadbolt on the mudroom side. Directly across from that was the door leading from the mudroom into the rest of the house. We're from the West Coast, so mudrooms were unusual, but a cool concept. I installed a latch deadbolt on the inside of the mudroom door, which only opened from inside the house. From there, a long hallway extended. You could turn right into 2 rooms, left into the kitchen, or go straight into the living room or upstairs. On the far side of the living room was the back door, also with a deadbolt. Like I said, it was a small town, and many people did not lock their doors. I'm from a big city, so it was a near religious habit to deadbolt everything as soon as he left. This particular night, I was on the couch on the phone with my mom, who was back home on the other side of the country. As we were talking, I heard a car pull into our driveway, shut off, doors close, and then someone pull open the screen door, making the front door handle move. Then there was a knock when whoever it was realized it was locked. I told my mom to hold on. I thought my husband had come home, and I went to check. As I reached for the deadbolt on the mudroom door, I froze. My mom said, "Why wouldn't he have called before coming home?" I realized she was right. I stopped and looked out the kitchen window. There was no one in the doorway and no car in the driveway. Only the screen door was wide open. I went and relocked everything, checking to make sure the garage door was down and all locks were secured. We hung up, and I went about my night. A few hours later, I heard the screen door open. This time, I heard the deadbolt unlock, and the door begin to open. The mudroom door tried to open, but my latch stopped it. As I stood up to see what was happening, I also waited for my phone to ring, assuming it was my husband and that he could not get in. No call. They stopped trying to open the door. Then I heard the front door open and slam shut, followed by the screen door closing, and then nothing. As I stood confused in the hallway, I heard the back door. The back door had a deadbolt and a chain lock. I heard it unlock and start to open, but when whoever it was realized there was a lock, it slammed shut again. At this point, I was confused, and I should have been more worried than I was. I blame adrenaline and being in my early 20s. A few minutes later, I heard my neighbor slam their door, the wife scream, and the door slam again, followed by her husband screaming and running past the back of our houses. Very shortly after, she was standing at my back window, yelling for me not to open the doors or go outside. I listened. Then I opened the mudroom door, relocked everything, and went upstairs to sleep. I barricaded my door and slept with all the lights on in the house. The next day, my neighbor mentioned they had caught someone trying doors. That was the last time anyone mentioned it. I apparently never mentioned it to my husband or my parents until about 2 years ago, when we were buying our house and selecting an alarm system. I'm still not sure who was there, what their plan was, or what could have happened. But what I do know is that I was a very young woman with out-of-state plates, married to a military man, living in a military town. He had a very set routine, and the only time he deviated from it, we had someone trying to get into the house. Luckily, I had a reason to move, not long after that. Months later, a friend who lived in the same townhouses across the street told me the reason they were moving. Someone had tried to break in on their first night. Her husband had a 24-hour duty since they arrived at our post. Even 10 years later, that night still gives me the creeps. Story 5. This happened in 2017, and I still have no explanation, as I've never heard of anything similar. My uncle lives in a rural part of western Kentucky, and I spent a large portion of my childhood at his house because my relationship with my parents wasn't the greatest. One of the things we always did together was ride ATVs through the trails in the forest surrounding his property, but there was a clearing he always told me never to ride on. He would never explain why. He also had a Beagle Lab mix named Max, who was always by my side and never left me when I was there. Once I got into my early teens, I stopped going over as often because my uncle was going through a divorce, so it was several years before I returned. That's when it happened. It was early November, and I decided to hop on my uncle's old ATV and ride some of the trails to relive old memories and reminisce about simpler days. That's when I reached the clearing atop a large hill, more like a rock face, that my uncle had always told me never to enter. Mind you, it was a clear and sunny day at approximately 1100 hours with no change in the weather listed in the forecast. My curiosity got the better of me, so I drove into the clearing and immediately noticed a change in temperature and humidity, an increase of more than 15 degrees Fahrenheit. The air felt like it does just before a storm, even though there wasn't a cloud in the sky. As soon as I noticed the temperature difference, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. Every hair on my body stood on end, and my brain practically screamed at me to leave. I had only entered the clearing by approximately 75 meters before turning around and hightailing it out. Nothing else happened while I was in the clearing. However, this is where the real craziness begins. The ride back to my uncle's house should have taken only about 15 minutes. I was about halfway back when, all of a sudden, it was as if the sun had vanished from the sky, and I was plunged into complete darkness. I was still on the ATV, traveling at approximately 25 miles per hour, but the headlights were on, even though I knew for a fact I hadn't turned them on. Everything was the same as it had been a split second ago, except now it was nighttime, and the ATV's headlights were on. I was sweating bullets and completely terrified, but at the same time, I felt an odd calmness throughout my body. All of my senses were heightened. I could hear every little sound in the forest around me, and my sense of smell was so strong I could detect everything from the plastic of the ATV to the thick scent of mud and vegetation. I made it back to my uncle's house, and as I approached the glass front door, I was greeted by Max. He immediately pulled back his lips to bare his teeth aggressively and started barking with pure hatred, something he had never done to me before. A few seconds later, my uncle came to the door. After pulling Max into another room, he approached the door again. For some reason, it was locked. I had tried the handle after he put Max away. All he said was, "You can't come in right now. I need you to go home and not tell anyone about what happened today." He brought my things to the door, placed everything into my bag, cracked the door just enough to reach out, set the bag on the ground, and then shut the glass exterior door and the large interior door, locking both behind him. When I reached into my bag and checked my phone, it was 23:52, almost exactly 12 hours later than it should have been. I hardly ever talk to my uncle anymore, and I honestly don't know what could have happened to me that day. Story 6. I have told this set of stories before, but I will share them again because they are fun. I will start with the most recent. I had lived in the sticks of Florida for most of my life, and you got used to certain things. One of those was taking vacations and bringing family and friends along. On one such trip, my best friend and I went with his parents. They always traveled up to St. George and the surrounding area, and since he was an only child, he could bring a friend so he would not be bored. On the day before we had to leave, we were in a small town off the island at the delta of a river. A long dock crowded with people fishing stretched across to a marina filled with houseboats. You had to walk around them to reach a distant gazebo standing alone over the water. To the right of the marina, the entire walk to the gazebo, except for the last 50 feet, where it broke away from shore, was lined with tall marsh grass. It rose more than 10 feet high, so you could not see over it, even from several feet above the water. If you stood on your toes, you could see the swaying expanse of grass and a few scattered trees. That was what we were doing when, with a single crack, we saw one of the trees shoot about 5 feet straight up and crash back down into the water with a splash. As if that were not enough, something, though we were not sure what, suddenly began charging the dock. The grass swayed and rustled in a perfectly straight line, right where we were standing. We panicked and sprinted to the gazebo. Somehow, the entire group of anglers did not notice anything. They did notice, however, when a few minutes later something swam beneath the dock and passed by everyone. The only discernible features we could make out looked like barnacles or something similar across its back, so whatever it was likely much larger than my 6x3 guess. But the water was not particularly deep, so it could not have been anything too massive. That was how we came across what we jokingly called the sea squatch. Dialing it way back to when I was a small child, I lived on the road leading to a well-known swimming hole. While the spot itself was not especially popular with tourists, it was less than 5 minutes by water to one of the more visited campgrounds in the region. About 30 minutes farther down the water was arguably the most popular spring in the area. But as many rural folk can confirm, living along a popular, well-traveled road did not mean everything around it was the same. We had 10 acres of land, and despite that, we knew every person who lived down the road, along the back roads, the side roads, and beyond. We could usually tell if someone was a neighbor just by their yell, and because of that, my parents always knew where to go when it was time to party. As was common for latchkey kids like me, I would sometimes wander off into the woods to play. It often happened when my dad was home, since it was not unusual to spot a rattlesnake in the yard or a 7 or 8 foot indigo snake, not to mention other predators. Being a precocious little kid, I once got myself lost. I started sobbing, crying, and shrieking for my dad to come find me. Some of the supplies I stumbled across were rusted and older than I realized, but at the time they did not look much different from the things in my own house. But let me tell you, it was very confusing being a 5 or 6-year-old and hearing my dad's voice calling from 2 different directions, each giving conflicting instructions. Then, before I knew it, he, a nearly 300-pound construction worker, appeared out of nowhere, grabbed me by the arm, and sternly marched me back to the house. He refused to ever bring it up again. My last story takes place at another friend's house. It was already a bit of a joke, known as the messed up ghost house, because, well, it had a basement, and in Florida, that was almost unheard of. You also lost all phone signal the moment you walked through the front door. As long as you were inside, you were completely cut off from making a call. But step outside through any of the doors, even onto the attached raised deck, and the signal returned. Many years after the incidents I am about to describe, the house burned down. Investigators ruled it not foul play but a sudden fire stemming from unknown causes. However, he had the largest house of any of us, plenty of property with a cool, dry riverbed, and it was roughly a 10 to 15-minute drive from most of our homes. This made it, even well into our teens when we could all drive, the de facto place to hang out and have parties. It was during one such party that a bunch of my friends wanted to jump the fence into the riverbed and head into the woods to mess around. I was cold and had no interest, but the door had an auto lock. I at least volunteered to be the door guy since I was tired of watching people play video games downstairs. Honestly, I do not know how long it was after they hopped the fence when I heard very loud screaming and shouting. I opened the door, stepped outside, and a minute or two later, 4 or 5 of them came piling out of the darkness, climbing back over the fence. His dogs, all usually docile, jumped between them and the fence, barking furiously. They sprinted all the way to the door, half dragging me inside, and out of breath, they started talking about something strange in the woods. No one saw it directly, but a pair of glowing red eyes, about 6 feet off the ground, moved in tandem before disappearing. Then all the bamboo groves around them shook violently, scattering weaker stalks. Needless to say, they panicked and ran back to the house as fast as they could. Everyone's dogs teased them for most of the night, but after a while one of them mustered the courage to go back, hoping to see if it would happen again. He gathered a crew to jump back in, opened the gate and got the bigger of the dogs to come with them, before trudging off into the darkness. Not even 10 minutes later, you could hear the dogs set off, racing back toward the house. You could hear 4 teenage boys charging over dead leaves and sticks, careening back and completely forgetting the gate was open as they jumped the fence. The dog brought up the rear, barking furiously into the darkness before returning through the gate. The 2 other guys who had gone with them confirmed the story. They saw a pair of red lights, seemingly unattached to anything, like eyes burning holes into them, off in the distance. No sooner had they noticed them than the lights seemed to blink out and reappear about 5 feet to the side, a little closer to them, a little closer to the house, and then it happened again. It was then that they all booked it, and the dog went from peaceful to growling, then barking. I told them it was messed up, but hey, we did not have to deal with it, did we? But of course there was more. Years later, when we were all 17 or 18, I do not quite remember the exact year, we had one big party to ourselves. His parents were gone for the week. The old story came up about how they had seen that messed up thing in the woods 3 or 4 years earlier. The conversation mostly devolved into the few of us who had stayed inside that night, teasing the group that went out, with me included as one of the cowards from back then. I popped upstairs for a drink and nearly peed myself. Right there, staring at me over the fence where our cars were lined up, was a pair of burning red orbs, about the size of eyes, fixed on the house. I swore loudly, and they blinked out. A couple of them appeared on the stairs from the basement up to the split entry doorway, and we could not seem to find them until we did. They were peering in through the windows of a buddy's car. We all bolted back down into the basement, a little shaken, and eventually started using the back stairs to get drinks, even though it was longer. At that point, pretty much everyone agreed there was something out there. We just did not know what. Later, his dad told us there was a roadway back there, and what we had seen were taillights. The problem was, we all knew that. The road was a full mile from the house and blocked by a huge fence. You had to either scale or walk around, and we were nowhere near it. Story 7. We went camping with a group of friends for a few nights. A few left the first night. They were cold and soaked when the rain came. The rest of us toughed it out for the night. The next morning, seeing the others' tent, we knew they were not staying that night either. It was soaked, along with everything inside: sleeping bags, clothes, and other gear. Night 2 was still rainy, but not as bad as the first. The others got a room about 5 miles away. We were all welcome to stay, but no one else did. Around 11:30, about an hour after bedtime, Jake's dog went crazy, barking, snarling, and carrying on. A couple of us decided to walk him and see what was going on. After about 5 minutes, the dog started to calm down. It seemed like a normal bedtime after that. Most of us headed inside, but a few stayed by the dwindling fire. They decided to add more wood and keep it burning because one of the girls felt a little uneasy, nervous due to the rain and the way Jake's dog had acted. They were out there for a while when one of the girls came to my spot and woke me. About 10 minutes earlier, Jake's dog had started again. They had gone for a walk and the dog had gotten loose. We called and called, but all we could hear was barking and snarling. Strangely, the sound seemed to come from the area that was all lake. We went looking with lights, even using car headlights to illuminate the area. Finally, we heard the dog whining and crying. The largest predator out there might have been a coyote, or maybe a small pack. When we found the dog the next day, it looked as if it had been skinned. Nearly every bone was broken in some way. The hide was never found, and the teeth marks were unusual, much larger than a coyote could make. The collar was still on its neck, but there was no skin. About 2 or 3 feet further off the trail, there was a large burned area. The strange thing was that we had passed through there 2 days earlier on the way to the site, and the area had not been burned at all. We would have noticed it. The area was quite remote, even from the motel 5 miles away. There were no fires there, and we would have seen them if there had been. Jake was very upset. He clearly wanted to dig a hole and bury his dog. Someone suggested we tell the rangers what had happened. One of the girls called the police for the town, and they contacted the rangers, who hiked to us and arrived around lunchtime. Not that anyone was in the mood for food. The purpose really was to keep us occupied and allow us to continue the camping trip and hiking, which most of us did. The ranger advised that we could either dig the hole ourselves or he could arrange for the dog's body to be brought out. We chose to dig. Jake said it was the best option, so we dug the hole and buried the dog in the burned area. The ranger also asked about the burn spot. It was not very large, about the size of a car or perhaps a truck. We continued the hike. The others joined us over the next few nights. Nothing particularly strange happened for the rest of the time until we hiked back out. When we reached our old spot where Jake's dog had been buried, the area was cordoned off with yellow tape. The path was completely blocked, A chain-link fence, about 3 meters or 10 feet high, had been erected in a large circle roughly 300 yards or 300 meters from the campsite. Armed guards were stationed about 100 feet or 33 meters away off the path. We approached them, as this was unusual. We did not know if we could continue along the path to reach the parking area for our cars. Some had left cars behind, and the jeeps could only continue the journey into the woods. Only the owners of those vehicles were allowed to follow a single armed guard. They retrieved the cars and met us by the highway later, escorted by a different guard in a jeep. The others had to find a different path out. That's when we realized the fence was enormous, and we could not see anything of interest. The others did not see anything either. At the trailhead, there was a government camper-type vehicle, which I later learned was a command post vehicle. Several tractor-trailer trucks were parked nearby with trailers attached. The best way to describe them was like mobile homes without windows, with roll-up doors in at least 2 places I could see. The tops were flat, and all the vehicles had government plates. We were told to leave the area, and we did. We were warned that if we did not comply, we could be detained. It was prudent to simply leave. Several days later, Jake decided he wanted to go back to visit his dog and everything. Who could blame him? A few of us went back with him. When we reached the area, we were sure we had left the dog there. The cove looked right, and the path in was correct. We came to a clearing. The clearing had been bulldozed flat. Trees were gone, rocks were gone, and the dog's body was likely gone if we looked in the right spot. I am not 100% sure. We never found out why or what happened. We have returned a few times, but I live far away now, so I have not been back in over 10 years. The last time we were there, not much had grown besides grasses and small plants. No trees had returned, which seems odd given how thick the growth usually is around this area. The trails have also been rerouted from this spot. No one is allowed to spend the night in this area anymore. The trails now begin in a different location, avoiding the water until much further in and around the lake. Sorry for the length of this, but I did not know how else to convey so much of it. Story 8. The weirdest thing ever happened to me in the woods. When I was around 20, I had lost both my home and my job. I had a young Dogo Argentino to feed, a camping tent, a bow, a crossbow, a machete, some knives, and the skills to hunt and cook wild animals. I chose to go live in the woods. I spent about 11 months there. It was the best period of my life, if you do not count the time I had to end a very angry boar with a knife, the time I had to stab a giant stray dog that attacked mine, or the week this thing happened. We were sleeping peacefully one night when my dog started growling softly. I woke up without turning on the light. I had one of those flashlights you recharge by pushing a lever. I touched her, and her body language showed clear fear. I comforted her, and as soon as she quieted, I listened, expecting to hear footsteps, thinking it might be a boar or something. Nothing. The next day, I kept my weapons ready. In the middle of the night, the same scene happened. Only this time, she did not make a sound. She just nudged me and gently bit me until I woke up. She was so terrified that she peed herself. I grabbed my crossbow and silently opened the tent door a little. There was nothing to see and nothing to hear. The third night, she peed herself again and started crying and barking loudly, shaking like a nun in front of the devil. I was furious. I stormed out, roaring like an animal to try to scare off whatever might have frightened my dog. I kept the crossbow pointed ahead and the machete ready at my belt. I slept with my clothes on, just to be safe. Nothing. I then convinced my dog to come out and used the flashlight to check the area with her by my side. There was not a single footprint, nor a sound. Then I realized something very creepy. I could not hear a single sound. No owls, no crickets, nothing. Normally you could hear at least something, but that night the place was deadly silent, as if we were on the moon. On the 4th day, at first light, I moved the camp quite far. I slept all day, planning to stay awake at night just in case. I kept a fire going and comforted the dog as much as I could. I fed her treats when I was able to get them and played with her. In the middle of the night, the forest gradually went silent again. My dog grew afraid. She peed herself. Luckily, we were outside in front of the fire. It is not easy to wash clothes, sheets, and a tent when you live in the woods. Then she started barking up at the tops of the trees. And I will be damned if I did not see the branches moving, as if something very large was out there. Being the careless idiot I am, I grabbed my bow. It is better than a crossbow for shots like that. I aimed at the top of the tree that was shaking and shot an arrow right into the middle. Nothing. On the 5th day, I moved the camp again. I slept all day and repeated the same routine at night, losing another arrow. On the 6th day, I found an abandoned farm at the edge of the woods. We broke in and spent the night there. My dog spent half the night staring at the door, shaking and crying, even though there was nothing outside when I checked. The 7th day was the same as the 6th, then it ended. Every single day, I checked the ground for footprints or tracks. After night 4, I also checked the trees for any signs of something climbing. I found nothing. When I finally managed to find a job in a house, I started looking on the internet for an explanation. Unless you want to believe in aliens or werewolves, the best explanation I found was a very skilled ninja bear. For some reason, it had chosen to follow us and hide in the trees overnight. I mean, a bear would surely have been big enough to scare the living crap out of a dogo argentino. It would also be strong enough to climb a tree to the top. But I never found any tracks, no claw marks on the bark, nor footprints on the ground. That is why I suspect the bear probably knew ninjutsu. In my country, there are no other animals big or strong enough to terrify a dog like that and also climb a tree, except for bears. Even bears, however, are very rare. I could not find a single report of bear sightings in the entire region, not just in the woods where I camped. So yeah, creepy is an understatement. Story 9. I was 9 months pregnant with my first baby. Our little rental wasn't ready yet, so good friends let us stay in their fifth wheel parked in their driveway while we waited. Being 9 months pregnant comes with certain needs. One of them was the constant need to pee every hour or so. I quickly grew tired of getting up, getting dressed, and navigating the heat. It was late August in California, hotter than the inside of a cow. I stripped at night just to survive the heat. Then came the challenge, sneaking into the house to use the bathroom without waking our friends, or more accurately, without waking their very annoying little yappy dog, who would then go into full save them from impending doom mode. So, I got desperate and a little creative. I was thirsty all the time and had this big plastic cup. So carefully, I disentangled myself from the sleeping quarters, doing my best not to wake my husband. This was a whole other level of absurd, because by then, I was the size of a small house. I'd waddle into the middle of the sitting or eating area, glance around to make sure nobody could see me, though honestly, who I imagined might be lurking in my postage stamp-sized square of linoleum at 2 a.m. is anyone's guess. Modesty dies hard, I suppose. Then I'd relieve myself in the cup. No need to get dressed, no need to shuffle indoors. Problem solved. So there I was, doing my thing, when suddenly, click, I was standing in a pool of light. Not cool. Panicking, I grabbed a stuffed animal or anything nearby to cover myself and looked up. Directly above me was the hatch we had rolled open as wide as possible, hoping for some desperately needed airflow. Now a blinding white light poured down from outside, shining straight through the hatch. It looked like a spotlight searching for an escaped killer. No sound. None. My ears were ringing. The silence was absolute. Then, poof, just like that, it vanished. Pitch black inside again, as if someone had flipped off a lamp. I quickly finished and dashed outside, tossing it into the bushes. As I scanned the area, I searched for the source of that freakishly bright light. Plane, helicopter, something capable of shining down through the hatch. Nothing. No vehicle on top of the camper. Nothing in the sky above me. No lights over the distant trees. Not even a streetlight in sight. Not a whisper of sound. Complete, eerie silence. Wild. I figured I'd track down some hidden light source once daylight came, so I crawled back into bed for another fleeting hour of sleep. The next morning, I stepped outside and scanned the area. Nothing. No triggered motion lights on the house. No street lamps. No lights on neighboring homes. There was a small airport about a block up the road, but it was 2 a.m., and I'd been fully awake for the 4th time that night. Clutching my husband's button-down to cover myself, I had dashed outside the moment the light vanished. Still no sound, no movement, not even a hint of what it could have been. Not lightning. The sky was crystal clear, scattered with stars. It didn't resemble a flare or fireworks, so who knows what it was. Not exactly spooky, just strange. Then again, given the entire situation I was in, it wouldn't have been the least bit shocking if a UFO had zipped off, leaving rainbow sparkles in its wake. Those 2 weeks were utterly surreal. Story 10. I was living in the woods with one other person. We're both fairly small women. I had a long-established campsite and another spot I liked to visit a few miles from a tiny shooting range in a small village. That day, I had been drinking before heading back to my camp, which was 2 to 3 miles from the nearest road or house. Before entering the woods, I stopped at a gas station. My only other friend in the area worked there. I invited him to join us for some wine, but he declined, saying he had plans with someone early the next day, so we set off alone. Anyway, as soon as my friend and I entered the path into the woods, we got this weird feeling. I shrugged it off late at night, around 11 p.m. We walked for about an hour to my camp and sat down starting to drink. Then I heard a dog barking, maybe 100 feet or more down the path. It was more of a worn-out area than an actual path. I thought it was extremely strange. I'd been camping there every night for months and never heard dogs or people, especially that late. I assumed maybe someone was at a nearby site I hadn't noticed. A few minutes later, I took off my pants. They were thick denim and cutting into me. My friend sat across from me with trees and a large rock behind her. Between us was the fire pit. I noticed a flashing light behind her, almost like a camera flash, and asked if she saw it, but she hadn't because of her position. The flashes stopped after 3 or 4 occurrences. Then I heard the dog barking again, this time much closer. The dog started circling the campsite, barking from different spots. I hadn't seen or heard anyone until I noticed movement through the dense bushes. Someone was mumbling, probably talking to his dog, just outside the firelight. I quickly pulled my pants back on and went on high alert. Then the shooting started. The first shots came rapidly, one after another. I don't know much about guns, but I knew this was serious. I grabbed my friend and moved us closer to one of the larger rocks, slowly packing our things. It was around 1 a.m. by now. The man circled the camp just out of sight, occasionally firing his weapon. At one point, he seemed to be getting closer. Panic set in, and we bolted. I didn't hear the shots over my own heartbeat and the sound of rocks sliding underfoot. My friend grabbed me, crouched low, and whispered urgently, trying to keep us both alive. My dumb drunk self decided to yell at my friend to start running. I also shouted at the person, "Bugger off," which, unsurprisingly, only made them start firing again. We managed to get away, hearts pounding, scrambling through the darkness. When we later told people in the village, including my friend from the store, they all shrugged it off, saying we'd probably just startled some raccoon hunters. Story 11. My family and I once lived back in some of our woods. No one could see our little plot, just trees all around. My family lived nearby but down the dirt road. There were no light poles, so it would get very dark back there. I started to notice a light above the trees. I figured out it was not a star because it would sway, rise quickly, completely disappear, and descend behind the trees. This went on for a few days, and I was the only one who had seen it. My dad hired some guys to help him with a deck. My husband sort of knew one of them and would invite him to dinner after they worked. That light always seemed to get closer when that guy was there. Often it was even at tree level. I knew this because I could see the light behind the trees, clearly not in the sky. I showed it to my husband, kids, and the guy, not mentioning it earlier in case I was imagining things. My daughter decided to play with it. She said, "Follow me if you're an alien." Then she walked to the left, and it went to the left. She went to the right, and it did too. She went to the right again, and it followed. That freaked me out completely. The guy was so shaken that he left, and the light followed him. It literally followed him as he walked away. I should also mention that this man lived in the woods behind us, so it was easy to see the light descend to where he lived. He wasn't very far from us, just separated by the woods. For about 4 days, that light would follow the man whenever he left. I thought he was about to be abducted by aliens. I would stare out the window, peering into the darkness for hours, afraid of missing a signs-like moment that would confirm my fears. One night, the man did not come, but the light was still there, freaking me out. By this point, I had nearly lost my mind, worried about my kids being abducted. I yelled at it, "What's your problem, huh? What do you want?" It seemed to follow me as I lost my composure. I ended up flipping at the bird, and it seemed to dive toward me. I kid you not. In that moment, I thought I had angered the aliens and they were about to crash into me. Then it disappeared while my back was turned, and I ran for my life. I told my father what was going on. His response was, "Are you on crack?" I got irate and had to explain that no, I was not on crack. He gave me a shotgun and told me to just shoot it down next time I saw it, if it is real. It only came back when that man returned, and it left when he left. I did not shoot it because I figured a shotgun would just anger the aliens. I never saw it again and lived in fear of aliens in the dark woods for the rest of our stay there. Years later, I was reading the local news and stumbled across an article that explained the lights. It was about how local cops used drones to catch drug dealers and other nefarious folks. My jaw dropped. I was about 21 when all that happened, and far more naive than I am now. This was also back before drones were popular or well known, especially for someone who didn't really use the internet much at the time. I remembered how, not long after completing the deck, the man visiting us was arrested on drug charges and other crimes involving the Mexican mafia, as it was called. We were pretty shocked because we thought he was just a regular old drug dealer, which we don't have an issue with. Mafia stuff, though, was not something we wanted near our kids. So I spent a portion of my life terrified of aliens when it was far more likely the police using drones. Whoever was manning the drone was probably bored and decided to mess with us, or they didn't want the man or us to catch on, so they made us believe it was aliens. Or, of course, they were actually aliens, and my brain made up a story it could handle. If it had been the cops and I had shot at it like my father told me, I would probably still be in prison today. I am so glad I didn't do that. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.